The Cincinnati Bengals have a massive offseason ahead, but they need to keep Tee Higgins. We'll discuss on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert Legacy Louis DiBiase. On today's episode, we're going to take a look at the biggest questions for the AFC North heading into this offseason. We'll talk about the quarterback decisions with the Browns and the Steelers, what the next steps need to be for Lamar Jackson to get over the hump. But we'll start with the Cincinnati Bengals. They got a lot of decisions ahead, but Tee Higgins at the top of that list. Before we dive in, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app, head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of the NBA. Also do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Again, Louis, Jamar Chase, the defense, a lot of big decisions for the Bengals.
Yeah, if they want to keep this core intact and keep their franchise quarterback happy, they got to find a way to franchise tag Tee Higgins and keep him long-term.
And that's a decision that they're going to have to make soon. So the franchise tag deadline, the deadline to actually place the franchise tag on your players is on Tuesday, February the 18th. And I would imagine that the Bengals do make that move with Tee Higgins and give them a little bit of additional time. But our guys from Locked On Bengals discuss the decision and what could happen afterwards.
And I know some are going to say, do not tag Tee again. To me, that is going to tell us a lot about this situation, because I think it's going to be hard for Tee Higgins, knowing the teams that are interested in him, to not want to look at the market. Like, I know it's easy for us to say, get the deal done, get the deal done. But Tee Higgins is a month away from free agency. He can get to free agency, even though he wants to be in Cincinnati and loves Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Of course, he's going to want to test the market. And I've said this. I think if he gets to the market, you're talking 32, 33, 34, 35 million per. I think he gets a lot of money, and more money than people expect, which means he will not return to Cincinnati. The Bengals can sort of prevent that from happening, where they're out of, they can assume some control, at least some negotiating power, by tagging Tee Higgins. And we'll see if they do that. If they do, $26.17 million or so on that franchise tag, and then from February 18th to March 4th, it's a 2-week window there. I know it feels like more days, but there's less days in March. A 2-week window where franchise tags can be placed on stars like Tee Higgins.
Joe, I think the Bengals need to get this thing done early to give themselves maximum amount of time to get this deal negotiated. Because, again, they have a lot of other things that they have to deal with this all season, and the pressure is really on with the Joe Burrow era and this time period in Cincinnati. They missed the playoffs this year. With the level of talent that they have on the offensive side of the ball and the level of play that Joe Burrow was at, they can't afford it. So, again, starting on the 18th, they can place that franchise tag. 2 weeks, got a deadline to get it done, but I think the Bengals need to do it now to give them max opportunity to negotiate a long-term deal with Tee Higgins.
Yeah, and Tyler, Joe Burrow has already placed a lot of the pressure on the front office and the top of the organization himself by saying they got to keep this core intact, and they need to. I think they have to find a way to pay Tee Higgins, not just the tag, because that's not going to solve things long-term. Mm-hmm. They got to find a way to get a contract extension done. That's what they need to do, but I don't know if they can do it at this point. It feels too little too late. The team I cover, the Philadelphia Eagles, are good at being proactive, not reactive with these kind of things. Paying A.J. Brown early, paying Devontae Smith early, paying the guys you want in the building before the players have all the leverage. And I just don't know at this point when Tee Higgins, as he said, he knows the market he's going to have. A team like the Raiders, the Panthers, they're going to empty the truck for him, right? And so I just don't know, even if you tag him, what kind of leverage Cincinnati has now, because Higgins knows his market and he's not going to play on the tag this year. So Cincinnati's reactive. That's who they've always been. And I think they already kind of messed this up.
Yeah, no, well, they're going to pay for it because they wait too long. We saw that with the Dallas Cowboys, too. Like, if you just wait, it's only going to get worse unless you – at that point, you're just banking on your players not doing better and not improving and not continuing to be great. You know, it's like, what are you hoping to happen?
Some kind of business model for me.
I know. It's just
crazy.
weird. We're banking on ourselves to make bad decisions and ultimately save ourselves money. It's like a fish eating its tail at the end of the day. Like, you're eating, but you're eating yourself. I think – for the Bengals, and let me make perfectly clear here, the reason that I think they need to tag Tee Higgins right away and get in the negotiation room is not only for the money purposes. You're talking about getting a deal, like you could have saved money by doing it earlier, but it's not just the value of like saving money in the cap. It's the clarity going forward.
Exactly.
Is right around the corner, and the Bengals still need to pay Jamar Chase. They got Jermaine Pratt asking for a trade. Trey Hendrickson wanted a trade before last season started, and he put it in his back pocket to play that year and led the NFL in sacks. He's going to want his money. He's going to want some sort of long-term security and clarity as well. So for me, yes, the Bengals can tag Tee Higgins, and if they do it by the deadline at the beginning of March, then they can negotiate into the summer with him. So I'm not saying that, they need to negotiate with him like they won't get that opportunity, but it's about getting it done early so you can get that done, move forward to all the other major decisions that you probably need to have some clarity on before you get to one of the biggest free agency periods in franchise history where you feel like you're wasting the Joe Burrow era. So you need to get this Tee Higgins thing done and put to bed immediately because you have Jamar Chase and Trey Hendrickson and Jermaine Pratt, and they needed additions on defense anyways. Like, huge offseason for the Bengals. I think they're one of the most interesting teams, but this first domino with Tee Higgins needs to fall, and it needs to fall quick no matter what it is for clarity's sake so they know where to go the rest of the offseason.
It's just one of the most frugal organizations, though, in NFL history, and I just can't see them. Yep. Maybe they make one of these moves, keeping Hendrickson, keep finding a way to keep Higgins, paying Jamar Chase. I just can't see a team. Yeah, I just can't see a team that has so little money invested in like top-tier contracts in their franchise's history pulling this off. I feel like it's too little too late. Higgins knows the market he has now and the open market, and I just don't think the Bengals will be willing to give him a contract, knowing everything else they have to do, that will be worth it for Higgins to say, yes, I'll do this, instead of calling your bluff, holding out maybe even after the tag and saying, I know another team's going to give me this money eventually, so you better pay up. I think they need to do that. I agree with you. I can't see Higgins in Cincinnati long-term anymore.
Well, here's the thing, Louis, even if they do pay all these guys and keep them around, are the Bengals going to be able to do anything after that? And we saw that this core last year wasn't good enough. So how do they pay everybody, keep everybody around, make everybody happy, and then also get better too? Because they need to get better as a team. Like, they need more depth, and they made some very risky picks in this last draft that may or may not pan out. Some looking like they're not going to pan out already. You know what I mean? So I guess they're in a peculiar situation where even if they do what everybody wants them to do, I don't know if that's going to help. And let me just say this, Jermaine Pratt, I'm sorry, what's happened to the NFL that I love? You used to have to be a certain level of player to request a trade. Jermaine Pratt put up a lot of tackles last year, 150 tackles on the season, but was terrible in coverage. He was not one of the better linebackers in the NFL. He has good stats. He put it in the box score. He played a ton of snaps. Good for him. Top 10 in snaps last year at linebacker. But you're not a good enough player to be requesting a trade, Jermaine Pratt.
No, I get that. And again, you have to get this done and be in the situation Cincinnati's in, you have to have an owner that's willing to shell out a lot of cash up front. And Cincinnati's just, they've never been lucrative like that. And even when they have been, they've not been willing to do that. So I don't know. It looks like it could get ugly in Cincinnati soon.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about willingness, like the willingness of the owner to spend that cash. But all of these owners are billionaires who could, liquidate.
That's why I don't want to hear that they can't do it.
Need it.
Yeah,
exactly. It's willingness to do it, not the money ability.
And Joe Burrow knows it, and that's why he's been saying everything he has over the past few weeks.
Right. Yeah, you guys know, you got friends who got money, but they still spend super cheap. It's not a bad way to go through life, quite honestly. But when you're a professional football team, may not be the path to winning. But with that being said, we got to continue to break down the AFC North. Lamar Jackson, another failure of a postseason. How does he take the next steps? Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off, you want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love a good SPG. Love using FanDuel's live betting feature as well because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3 or betting on Mac McClung to win a 4th dunk contest in a row. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com to join today for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. The Madman Tyler Rowland, Legacy Louis DiBiase here with you on today's edition of Locked On NFL. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your league every day, I'll say, for Locked On NFL. But with that being said, we talked Bengals. Now I do want to talk about the Baltimore Ravens because an unceremonious exit for the Ravens once again, feeling like they had enough to get it done, but just didn't come up in the big moments. Going forward, it's not so much transactional, in my opinion, with the Ravens. Who do they sign? Who do they add? It's just about their mental preparedness and getting over that hump. And my guy, Kevin Ostreicher from Locked On Ravens, wondered, is this just who the Ravens are?
We saw the defensive turnaround. We saw how historic the Ravens offense was. And it doesn't matter. Like, it just feels like no matter what, January comes and this team just forgets how they got there for the most part. And that, to me, I think is extremely difficult because you wonder, like, is this the Baltimore Ravens? Is this the team's identity? Right? Is that who this team is now? Is there enough to say that, yeah, when the Ravens get into those big moments, they're going to falter, whether it's Harbaugh or Lamar or Andrews or Flowers or whoever, Monken, like whatever it is it going to be too big for them every single time? And I hate that we have to have that conversation.
So, Louis, I know that you're a big Lamar defender, and folks who have listened to the show know that I think Lamar gets a little bit more love than maybe is necessary, needs a little bit more blame than he gets. But from a pro Lamar perspective, what do you think the Ravens need to do around Lamar Jackson for them to take that next step?
I think Kevin's right. And first off, haven't checked in on him since the playoff loss. He's got the beard going. He's feeling bleak. Yeah. He does not feel like he's confident in the Ravens moving forward. But he makes a good point. And you said it too. It's not transactional. Like, yes, I think there's one thing that they've never really done is give Lamar that true alpha receiver. Like, they've invested a lot of resources. First round pick in Hollywood Brown, first round pick in Rashad Bateman, first round pick in Zay Flowers. They have drafted weapons. They brought in Derrick Henry. He hasn't had that A.J. Brown type, or when the Bills got Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and it helped, leapfrog his career in 2020. That's the one move I guess you could say, like, that could help you in those clutch big-time moments in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. Another alpha is there to go make a play, right? When Mark Andrews couldn't, when so many others in the playoff couldn't for Baltimore. But at the same time, like, Kevin's right, they have the pieces on defense. Lamar Jackson this year was yet again an MVP candidate, and I think advanced his career even further as a pocket passer. And just, I think he was on another level even than his other 2 MVP seasons. So I think it's really just comes down to when the time comes, you just got to do it in the playoffs. You have to just be, like you said, mentally ready, and you can't choke. And that's kind of who the Ravens have been for. It's not just 1 or 2 seasons. Like, this has been like a 5-6 year thing now. So I don't know if there's like an answer that you can find in the offseason. And I guess that's the bleak part about it because they're right there all the time.
Well, I think really you have to think if they don't pull it off this upcoming season, they probably have to make a change with John Harbaugh. At that point, you have to change. You can't keep pouring the same ingredients in the cauldron
the definition
and thinking
of
you're going to get a different spell. Yeah, exactly that. So I think at some point you're going to see a big change like that. But I generally do agree with you. I like to make the case that Lamar has a ton of help. 2 first-round receivers. Mark Andrews has been a top 5 tight end for the last, 3 years, 4 years. Isaiah Likely is a pretty good young tight end. The offensive line is consistently coached well at minimum, so there's decency on the offensive line. And then you add in Derrick Henry. They've had enough, and Monken has been praised.
Agreed.
I think they have enough. But if there is one thing where I'm definitely going to agree with you, it is fair to say that he's never had a true dominant alpha 1 wide receiver like what you're talking about. I think that although Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers are first-round wide receivers, they were guys taken a little bit later in the first round. They're not dominant physical players. Zay Flowers, obviously a smaller, more electric guy, which, if they would have had him around during the playoffs, maybe it would have been different because he is a high-level player, and I think he's, a tad underrated at this point for what he can provide and the electricity he brings out there. But I am a believer. Now we're getting into Tyler's core philosophies as a football head. I believe that your wide receiver group needs to be built like a basketball team. And I do believe that you need that big athletic power forward who can go above the rim and grab the rebounds. And, for me, I continue to say that I will take contested catchability over separation.
Sure.
And people are like, that's crazy. And I get it. But what I would argue is it's great if you can get separation, and getting separation consistently is something that I want from my wide receiver group somewhere. But what about when you don't? Because you can't always get separation. No matter how fast you are, sometimes the coverage is called perfectly to take away what your route is, and you can't get separation. Sometimes a guy just, they get paid too on defense. But I need a guy who, when there is nothing, think about Jalen Hurts. Is it perfect all the time? No, but when there is nothing there, he can make something happen. So even if you are covered, can you make something happen? Can you make the big play? Can you get the touchdown in the red zone when it's tight and we can't get somebody open with a rub route because they're playing banjo and they're switching it off? And can I just throw it up to you and you're going to make a play? That, to me, is the most valuable trait in a wide receiver. It's what I want from my number 1 wide receiver. And Lamar Jackson has never truly had that. I don't know if they can get that for him this offseason. I don't know if that's possible. But if he had that, he maybe wouldn't have to do it all on his own if he had somebody else that could rise to that playmaking level.
I don't know if there is that guy in the offseason, but there is a player I keep trying to force off the Seattle Seahawks at some point this year. And maybe at the deadline, let's say Seattle's middling again and they finally just got to call it on whatever this purgatory that they're in, kind of Steelers light. A DK Metcalf type of body. You talk about contested catchability and alpha on the outside. Is he A.J. Brown coming to Philly? I don't know if he's that caliber, but this is a consistent 1,000-yard receiver that's still a wide receiver 1. That's the one guy I could think of could be available at some point this year that takes the Ravens to the next level. But overall, at the same time, there's not a lot of answers you're going to find in free agency, in the draft. Lamar's just got to find a way eventually to get it done, and he just hasn't been able to. Even as a pro Lamar guy, I've always said his kryptonite does come in the playoffs, and that it's hard to really argue that at this point with the sample size of examples we do have.
Yeah, whether you want to call it fair or not, Lamar didn't play awful this postseason, and he did play very well at the end of the game.
The turnovers are the turnovers, right? You can't argue them. You just can't argue them.
The narrative did not get stopped this postseason. That's all we know for sure. But with that being said, we got 2 more teams, and they both have big questions at quarterback. We go from 2 of the most secure quarterback situations in the entire NFL to 2 of the least secure. So what are the Steelers going to do? What are the Browns going to do? They both might be looking at quarterbacks in the NFL draft. All right, Louis, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. Talk Bengals, talk Ravens. Now I want to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers here. Before I do, thanks again for making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you check out the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL with Tony Wiggins in the barbershop. But looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers, we're hearing rumors about, should they trade for Matthew Stafford? Oh, they're trading for Trevor Lawrence, which me and Ross talked about on a Friday show. Just nonsense. You know what I mean? Shout out to Tony Wiggins, of course, for dealing with that on Friday. Made the guy record a short just so he had to talk about it for a second. But the Steelers need a quarterback. That's why they're in all these rumors. They need a quarterback, and I think that there's a good chance that Russell Wilson is let go. We're hearing the Steelers want to pick one of the two and roll with them. I don't think you can roll with Justin Fields as your planned starting quarterback in 2025. So one other option that the Steelers could go with is to draft a quarterback. And they may not be in perfect position to draft a quarterback, but as my guy Chris Carter from Locked On Steelers talked about, most of the good quarterbacks in the NFL didn't come because of a tank. And the best quarterback in the NFL came because of a trade up outside the top 10.
The Chiefs were the 27th overall pick, and they did not trade away some super haul to get him. They traded their first rounder that year. So they traded the 27th for the 10th, really just a flip of those picks, a third rounder that year, and a first year, the first rounder the next. I think people would be fine if the Steelers traded up to get a franchise level quarterback for one future first rounder and a third round pick and your first rounder that year that you're swapping for. Essentially, you lost one extra first round. They didn't give away. It wasn't like the Herschel Walker trade where the Cowboys just got all the assets in the world for him. It wasn't like they traded 3 first round. They traded one extra first rounder to do that. If the Steelers can go and get that now. If your qualm is, I don't know if the Steelers are going to be good enough to scout and find that quarterback, that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But tanking don't help nobody because clearly it hasn't helped anybody win a Super Bowl by doing that to get their quarterback since the Giants were the first overall pick back in the same year the Steelers drafted Ben Roethlisberger.
Chris makes a passionate and strong case there. So, with that being said, I got to say it. Shedeur Sanders, we're hearing he may not go as high as maybe some people think, maybe more in the 10 to 20 range, 15 to 22 range than the 1 to 5, 1 to 10. Wouldn't Shedeur Sanders on the Steelers trading up from pick 21 to get Shedeur Sanders, wouldn't that just be sweet? That's a perfect match.
It makes so much sense. But he does make a good point, Tyler. Like, when you're caught in this purgatory of never being good enough to win a championship because you don't have that franchise quarterback, but you're not bad enough either to pick at the top, and you can't just bottom out in the NFL. Like, you can't really tank openly.
You'll get fired.
Yeah, especially when Mike Tomlin's your head coach. He's never going to accept that. You do kind of, and I said this about the Eagles back in 2021 when they felt stuck in that middling ground. You have to take a shot on a bottom half of the first round type of quarterback prospect, even if they're not a perfect player, like a Bo Nix or Michael Penix type of prospect last year. Maybe it's Shedeur, like you said, he falls. But if not, maybe you got to take a risk on a Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. That might be an option. For me, though, I don't hate the idea, if you don't like the prospects this year, on taking a Hurts-like approach with Justin Fields and saying, we're going to build this an RPO-style offense. Don't turn the football over. He's a good deep ball passer. Let's try to just build around him like the Eagles did Jalen Hurts. Is he the perfect quarterback? No. Is he ever going to be a top 5, top 10 player at this position? Probably not. But let's try to go all in on this. I think that's one of their only 2 real options that they have, and I don't hate that more than some. I'm more of a Fields guy than others, I would say.
Would you take Justin Fields over Aaron Rodgers for 1 year if you're Pittsburgh?
I would. Yeah, because at least there's some sort of upside. Aaron Rodgers is just not worth the drama at this point. I just don't think the reward makes sense for all of the issues that comes with. I'd rather have Justin Fields.
Well, let me say this. I think that Aaron Rodgers and Mike Tomlin together would be oil and water.
Like, it just does not feel right at all.
Yeah, that does not feel like that would work out. But I disagree with you, though. I think Pittsburgh has a win now roster. J.J. Watt, 31. Minka Fitzpatrick, 29, I believe, going to be 30 soon. I think if they used all their resources to add to the offensive line so they had the ability to run the ball with more consistency this year. You have a playmaker like George Pickens. Maybe you go get a Cooper Kupp to be kind of your chain mover, even though he's not the player that he once was. You add Aaron Rodgers on a cheap contract. I think if that did happen, again, I'm curious about the fit with Tomlin and Rodgers, but if that did happen, I guess my view of Aaron Rodgers this season is he's not going to be in like, oh, we're going to win a title like he was when he went to the Jets. Like, I think he would be more laid back. I don't think he'd be wanting Randall Cobb and Alan Lazard. Like, I don't think he would be in that mindset. I think he would be more in a laid back mindset of, hey, I want to enjoy this year and play on a good team and win as much as I can. I just don't think he would be like the shadowy overlord that he's maybe been in the past.
I just feel like you just did that with Russell Wilson, though, and at least Fields presents some upside, and I think he can be as good as Rodgers' ceiling next year, and he adds that 12-on-10 element running the football. If you want to go all in on the Eagles-like approach where you're going to run more than anybody in football, I kind of prefer Fields more in that way, but either way, all the options we're discussing, that's the unfortunate part about being like a consistent 9-8 team. Like there just really isn't no clear out of that purgatory you're in, and it's a tough place to be in the NFL.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. But talking about a team that's not consistently in purgatory is the Cleveland Browns, and they sit at the number 2 overall pick. They got big questions at quarterback as well. My guy Spencer from Locked On Browns talked about how there are really only 2 options for the Browns with the number 2 pick this year.
I have gone back and forth with you on what the Browns' options are at the number 2 overall pick that they have at their disposal. There are plenty of reasons and arguments to be made why they should take a quarterback, why they should maybe trade back, why they should take somebody else, maybe an Abdul Carter, for example, who is one of the more highly rated players in this class just in general. I have come to the conclusion, though, that I think there's only 2 real options for this team. They either take a quarterback at number 2 because they believe in their heart of hearts that one of these guys, one of these top guys, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, we know the names at this point, truly can be like a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL and be the quarterback that they are looking for, or they trade out, trade back, as I've talked about before, and accumulate as many picks as possible to set yourself up for, future success, future team building, whether it's drafting guys this year or next year. That's it. Those are the only real 2 options in my mind.
I don't necessarily agree. I think if you trade Myles Garrett, for example, you're getting a ton of picks for Myles Garrett. Therefore, you don't need to trade down from number 2 to collect all those picks like you would. If you combine those 2 moves together, I think you can just take Abdul Carter at number 2 overall or Travis Hunter if one of those 2 guys are available to you, or the quarterback that you want, quite frankly. I think you can do any of that if you also trade Myles Garrett, because you're getting the picks that you desire to rebuild your team from the Myles Garrett trade. If you did both, I mean, Cleveland's analytics people, so they may very well want to, stack the numbers in their favor as much as possible. But I will say this, it's a good edge class. So if you feel confident in Shamar Stewart or Mike Green, you know what I mean? You could, or Mykel Williams, or you want to use Jalen Walker as that Joker type, there are options to trade down, collect picks, and still, get what you're looking for on the edge or as a pass rusher for the Browns. So I think there are more options than that, but I don't think the 2 options that he's discussing are terrible moves.
I'm taking the quarterback. I don't know. Just for me, you never know when you're picking top 2 again, even if you don't love the class. We've seen in the NFL the last few years how anything can work. Like there's prospects, this prospect in a vacuum seems like it shouldn't work as a franchise quarterback, and he's good. And then this guy's a completely different style of player, and it works out here. Anything can work. I don't think a lot of people thought Bo Nix would have the success he did in 2024. So
correct.
You're at the top. Learn from the other team in your division, the Pittsburgh Steelers, that have to be creative because they're in this purgatory. You just made the playoffs with Joe Flacco 2 years ago. You never know when you're going to get back there. Like your roster isn't in total shambles. I would just strike while you have the opportunity. I mean, Washington just got to an NFC title with a rookie quarterback. And was Jaden Daniels the perfect prospect? I don't think so. I don't think anybody thought he'd have the year he did. So I just think when you're in this spot, you got to take the risk. And I think I'd much rather have Cam Ward in that spot than Sanders, but if I'm Cleveland, I'm taking one of the 2. I think quarterback's been their biggest issue for years, as long as I've been alive, and you got to just keep taking swings until you get it right.
I personally like Shedeur Sanders' game.
Sure.
I think he could be a solid starter. I do wonder about his arm strength in the Midwest.
That's fair.
The Browns, they're looking to build a new stadium. Who knows if they go indoors or not. But right now they're outdoors. The Steelers are outdoors. Sanders' he can make all the throws, but it's definitely noticeable that he does not have high-level velocity. I think if he came into the NFL, he would not be in the top 10, top half quarterbacks in velocity. And in the outdoors like that, you just wonder. We saw Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh, and that was a little bit of an issue. So
Cam Ward makes a lot more sense in that scenario, at least compared to the 2.
I would say that as well. Personally, I like Cam Ward a little bit better because if neither of the quarterbacks are a slam dunk for different reasons, I'll go with the high end physical traits.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But hey, some guys just can play ball, and Shedeur Sanders could just be a guy who's, always been high level accurate, and the intangible things like that a Joe Burrow wins with, Shedeur Sanders may be able to win in a similar way. But that's a great conversation that we're going to have on the show at a later day. I'll probably make sure to get Louis back in on that conversation as well when we start getting closer to the draft. But that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. For me, your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, my co-host, Legacy Louis DiBiase. Thanks for tuning in, and stay safe out there.